Okay, hello. My name is CorneliaConnolly and I'm a lecturer in the School of Education at NUIGalway. My background, however, is in computer engineering, and the title of my talk today is on robot education in healthcare. Like all good classes and talks, I'm going to start off by stating my learning intention, and it's to reflect upon robot education in healthcare through a critical but positive lens. I'm using this definition of education as the process by which people deliberately support learning, including formal learning and formal school-based education, but also the activities in the workplace, self-study, informal learning environments. And as we know, education has always been a controversial discussion topic, and whether that conversation happens at a meeting, a conference, in a school, in a classroom, everybody has an opinion because of their professional training, or simply because of our own experiences as being former students. But there are, however, new classroom approaches, methods and techniques, and they continually develop, and they're debated upon, they're implemented, they're replaced by newer ideas. But I guess, and we're all looking for that, learning recipe. But we all can agree that without education, there's no progress. And the impact of technology on that really adds that complexity. Technology adds a complexity to the pedagogical context. The impact of technology is so overwhelming that we really have no choice but to keep up with it, and educational systems are no exception. And most evidently in the last year and during the pandemic, we've seen that move to online and blended learning approaches, and really that belief that every teacher needs a classroom and some students is no longer a valid paradigm. But education it lies at a particular or peculiar crossroad, really often. On the one hand, it has a responsibility for anticipating real life skills and preparing us and our students, our young people, our colleagues for an increasing complex world. But education methodologies can only be formalized after the practices have been defined. But this dichotomy is aggravated when you throw into the mix that idea of technology, because of the fast pace of innovation and because of the constant change. This infographic was developed by an European Commission project, and the link is there to check it out in more detail. But it really, I suppose, expands that view from the classroom to the studio to the virtual, and it looks at the trends that are influencing education that has been played out in the learning environments that we have interacted with. And we see that, novel and emerging technologies have a role to play in the changing context of learning, of teaching, and of assessment. This here is then a slide on the 4 major developments in technology that are affecting change in regards to learning and education. And it's by a very recent publication by Chris Hoadley and colleagues for the Spencer Foundation. And they really talk about that rise of pervasive total data, the platforms for realistic experiences like AR and VR contexts and learning in that space, as well as the deployment of artificial intelligence and algorithms and the processing of big data. And then also that increasing access to ubiquitous technology, but with the digital divide. And then, I suppose then you throw into the mix robots, so we're really in an era, Chris Hoadley talks about that era of cyber learning, which denotes a greater degree of technology, as well as a qualitative shift in the way technology and education are intertwined. And this year is a robot developed by Yale University. It's called Abby, is a she, and Abby is a desk-sized robot with an accompanying web application, and can be utilized with a Wi-Fi enabled device. The online skills-based lessons then are paired with Abby and her online friends as part of an ecosystem to improve individual academic achievement. And it has been found to improve that in particularly, subjects that are tedious or challenging for many students. And, in the healthcare setting, we've seen many different varieties of robots to educate and to help and to assist. And even when one thinks back, I guess, to the origins of robots, we think to maybe some science fiction literature or even cartoons, and I'm thinking of the Jetsons. Then within movies, we've seen robots being our friend in Star Wars, but then also as an enemy in Terminator, as an example. But often robots are depicted with emotions, they're depicted with human characteristics, intelligence, voice, and movement, personality and personalities. And so in many regards, robots are seen as a friendly, and even the semi-humanoid robots like Dave, for example, that the Hive Lab has, that semi-humanoid approach hopefully is seen as a friendly colleague. And robot usage can contribute to education in many different ways, in positive regards. They can be great benefits as a teaching tool, particularly, that repetitive tasks, they provide flexibility, they present digital data, and they're interactive. Secondly, robots facilitate learning, that hands-on activity, again, providing learners with fun activities. They're engaging, they increase motivation and learning. And they also support the development of 21st century skills. They've been used very much so in STEM education and, promoting problem solving and critical thinking. So there's been lots of positives in regards to robot usage and contributing to education. But I guess looking and going back to my learning intention, being slightly more critical, I guess, about robot education and healthcare, I just want to present maybe some questions, some thoughts that we should perhaps ponder on. The first being around data and AI and the implications for education and healthcare. So as we all know, machines, technology, robots, any form of computing gathers data, and AI is hungry for data. But I think we have to remember and be mindful that data is imperfect. It's focused on the past, not the future. It's biased, and what makes data and what makes computing, the robot, the technology valuable and useful and powerful can also at times be harmful. Artificial intelligence will increasingly become the engine of healthcare education, and patient data is that fuel. So we as educators, as healthcare professionals, we need to pay close attention to the fate of the robots and to the educational platform providers, to the ecosystem of platforms and services that we work with and within. Will the education platforms, act as data brokers to advanced AI backends delivered by competing, giants? Will they get bought out or simply replaced by larger corporations? And will this lead to, healthcare education, on platforms, or will the platforms be in our classroom or in our context? I guess, we need to really fundamentally think about machine learning as well, and, what, where, how that data is being gathered and how that's influencing our learning. Systems that learn refers to that ability of artificial intelligence to kind of acquire knowledge directly without it being pre-programmed at times. And the implications for this and the increasing datafication of education raises significant questions about the models of human behaviors that we ultimately will then learn from the robots. And so I guess we need to question how much this salient machine learning is having on our healthcare education system and the learning undertaken by human beings. These questions, I guess, extend, that idea of the formal learning. And so it highlights the extent that we need to kind of expand our horizons, and artificial intelligence ability to mimic intelligent behavior represents really an area of technological advancement that has the potential to change, or that is already changing, the nature of many human activities. And that's okay, but we have to know that that's occurring. The second point is around partnerships and collaborations, and just that question of who is creating and driving that agenda. There's a commercial ecosystem that exists and that has tremendous influence on what takes place within educational technology, in the broad sense. And again, as educators, we need to pay close attention to the faith of these educational platform providers, to that ecosystem of platforms, to the services that the students, the learners, the teachers work with. Who is driving the global digital healthcare education agenda? Is it being influenced by large corporate businesses? Or is it from the educator? Also we have large, the growing markets in China and India, and how do the corporate actors and our educational technology, or how does that agenda interact? And there's nothing new or wrong with commercial contributions, but the question, I guess, around regulation and oversight activities have to kind of have a role, has to be questioned there. I suppose some companies kind of, value efficiency, convenience, competition, but we also have to think about humanity, sustainability, and truth also. So, should large corporations play exercise, I guess, soft power in influencing and shaping healthcare education decision-making, while at the same time perhaps profiting from the decisions being made? It's just another question to ponder on. The last point I wanted to raise was around the limits of robots, and just flagging that technology is not free. Computing is powerful, but it can't solve every problem. It's often wrong, it's not necessarily neutral, and it's certainly not free. And when we think about, computing is really, that in the industrialized, or kind of default worldview that of economic growth, that it's achievable, that it's desirable, that it's possible. But that's at odds with other scientific fields that see this growth as really problematic from an ecological or societal point of view. So the work by Nardi et al., they talk about computing within limits, and exploring new ways and new forms of computing that support well-being, while enabling that to work within the material limits and the ecological limits that are out there. So steps forward, how do we move forward? How do we play a role and contribute to a solution? I think really, as healthcare professionals, as educators, we need to actively design robot technologies that facilitate an equitable future for everybody. We need to reestablish at times that value of formal education in an era of ubiquitous learning, and distinguish the differences or highlight those differences. We need to be supported in maintaining our role in guiding and leading global digital health education agenda. And we also need to explore different forms of robot education within limits, and consider the global societal, ecological, and material limits. We need to better understand how robot education in a healthcare setting, how that intersects with, the holistic conception of human learning and thriving. We need to study and develop new models for how technology and how the robots are going to, play a role? How do they prepare educators and healthcare professionals and the decision makers? We also, I really am passionate that we need, actionable and targeted research on how robot education advances and curtails equity, and a better understanding to design the technologies to support this. Society also needs to recognize that, when a technology is kind of causing harm, we need to stop that innovation in its tracks. But, the learning cycle is longer than the technology cycle. We need to urgently research the technology at the pace at which it is evolving. And that's a challenge. We need to continually examine, question, problem pose, as well as problem solve. And as educational technologists, as designers, as educators, and as healthcare professionals, we need to be active agents in that research, not just in the implementation, but in the design and in the development. I think we also need to kind of fundamentally remember our core values and what's driving our interest in this space. We need to consider the assumptions that are made about the patients, the care, the learning that's taking place. And so, and also the models of pedagogy that we're promoting. So to support the progress in this area, researchers, designers, healthcare professionals, educators need to commit to that shared values and equity to develop new methods for research and design, create new relationships and structures to support the research and development and the enactment. I love this quote from Neil Selwyn that talks about care rather than competition, cooperation rather than rivalry, and imagination rather than corporized creativity. I guess, fundamentally, as educators, as healthcare education community, we're in a position to uphold the values and to discover how to teach everybody about the role of robot education, to enact, to integrate robot education in a healthcare setting, and to ensure a future for digital healthcare education. So, Gurmila Mahagav, and thank you very much for listening.